Welcome to Shoot Like a Girl, a podcast featuring interviews with extraordinary military women from around the world who push their limits on and off duty. I'm your host, Kate Stewart, and this is episode number 29. Today's episode features mini interviews with 5 different women in 3 different countries who are currently deployed with the Canadian Armed Forces on Operation Impact and Operation Foundation. During this episode, you'll hear about their journey to becoming a member of the Canadian Armed Forces and gain insight into their roles on deployment and their jobs back home.
Steady, nice and steady. Light, hill, cover. I'm a steamroller, baby.
I'm a steamroller, baby.
Just a rolling down the line.
Just a rolling down the line.
I'm a steamroller, baby.
I'm a steamroller, baby.
Just a rolling down the line.
Just a rolling down the line.
So you better get out of my way now.
So you better get out of my way now.
Before I roll all over you.
Before I roll all over you.
My first guest on this episode is Petty Officer First Class Frances Bartoch. She is currently deployed to Kuwait as a Senior Human Resource Manager at the Operational Support Center, Southwest Asia. Frances joined the Naval Reserves in 1998 in St. John, New Brunswick. She joined as a bosun and remustered to RMS clerk in 2009. In 2015, she took a component transfer to the Reg Force as a Human Resource Administrator. She is currently posted to a Naval Reserve Division, HMCS Prevost, in London, Ontario, as a Reg Force member. Frances has around 4 years left until retirement, at which point she'll spend her time hiking with her dogs and maybe sell some popcorn at a baseball game. Frances, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
So, where did you grow up?
So I grew up actually in St. John, New Brunswick. We immigrated from England in 1985 to St. John, New Brunswick, and spent, kind of my childhood there. And then probably around when I think it was around 18, 19 years old, I moved to Halifax with the military and just stayed there for a very long time.
Do you have any military members in your family?
No, I mean, my great-grandparents were in World War II, but nobody in my immediate family, no aunts, uncles, nobody is in the military. It's just me.
And so what sort of planted the seed for you to go in that direction?
It was actually Sea Cadets because I grew up, my mom was a single mom, not a whole lot of extra money, and Sea Cadets was free. So every aspect to the cadet program was free. So that was very kind of appealing for her. So I got into cadets and I saw the whole process through. And then some of my friends from the cadet program were joining the Naval Reserve. So I wasn't doing a whole lot in St. John, New Brunswick. I was kind of going nowhere quickly. And I thought, why not give it a try? One of my best girlfriends was joining at the time. So we kind of did it together. And I've been in for 24 years now.
And so how did you pick which trade to go into when you were deciding to join the military?
So there wasn't a lot of options, actually. I had the choice of either being a bosun or being a cook. So not really knowing a whole lot about either of them. And I kind of knew that at the time I wasn't very good at cooking because I was still quite young. So I just chose the bosun trade because it seemed kind of appealing. You were out on the upper decks of the ship involved in things. And so I just kind of blindly chose that trade.
So what did the training look like for that and how did you enjoy it?
So I think it was a lot of fun. It was, and it still is, it's a hard sea trade. So they kind of call it like the infantry of the sea. And, it's heavily dominated by men. So it was, on a lot of the courses, it was just me and one other female, maybe me and 2 other females amongst, maybe 25 students, let's say. But the training was a lot of fun. It was a lot of hands-on training, learning to drive the boats, learning how to fire the weapons. And then, of course, if you fire weapons, you have to clean the weapons, and doing damage control, learning about the fire and the flood and all the seamanship evolutions that you can ever imagine. Yeah, so it was a lot of fun, actually.
You said that on some of the courses you would be the only woman. How did you find the attitudes of the men towards you at that time?
It was fine, really. You just become friends with everybody. And I never really had any issues kind of in that aspect with other men in the trade. No, it was good.
I find one of the things about, especially on the East Coast, thinking of bosuns, as I always think about the cold, because for our dive course, we have to be qualified rib coxswains. And I did my course in January. And I think that's probably our night navigation on that course was probably the coldest I've ever been in my entire life.
I understand. I mean, the deck of the rib, it's basically metal. And then you're standing there with your steel toe boots on the metal, and your feet are just blocks of ice. Yeah, it's very cold.
During that time, you were in the reserve, right?
Yeah.
So were you working a full-time job, or were you going to school, or did you just primarily do full-time reserve contracts?
So at the beginning, I was kind of going back and forth between Halifax and St. John, and I was just doing kind of like little Joe jobs in St. John, like working at Wendy's or Payless shoe stores, not really, like I said, going nowhere fast. So then I got a contract in Halifax, and then I was just able to kind of piece things together. You know, I was able to get an extension, and then I was able to find another position, and then, you know, I was able to go on another course, and just over time, it just kind of evolved into just a long-term continuous employment that never ended, really.
And did you do many deployments or sort of long training evolutions at sea?
I mean, we did some training at sea for like the naval warfare officers. So we would go down south, down Charleston was the first place that I ever saw my first palm tree. That was kind of exciting. Yeah, so down the southern states, down into like Santo Domingo. But here on Op Impact, actually, it's my very first deployment in 24 years. It was on my bucket list as, you know, before I retire, I had to do a deployment. So this is actually my very first one. It's just kind of like the stars aligned and everything worked out. And yeah.
So are you an HRA now? Did you switch trades?
I did, yeah. In 2009, I changed over to an RMS clerk. And then in 2016, the trade split. 16 or 15, the trade split, and I became an HRA.
Did you get to decide which way you went, or did they just kind of assign that to you?
Yeah, actually, we did get to decide. And I chose HRA actually because I thought that the P2 position on a ship was going to be an HRA because they were dealing with the pay and things like that. So I thought that the P2 position on ship was going to be an HRA. So I chose HRA, but actually it turned out to be the FSAs, like the Financial Service Administrators. It was. So I didn't get my chance on ship yet as an HRA. No.
Yeah. And that's sort of the other interesting thing too, I guess, that some people might not know is that it's what's called a purple trade, so that you can do stuff like this, what you're doing now, which I'm assuming is primarily Army and Air Force people where you are.
That's very correct. Yeah. Actually, there are more Navy people on this deployment apparently than they usually get. I don't know exactly how many, but there are a handful of us. So it's kind of nice.
How did you find out about this position?
It was actually a friend of mine at work. She's always on the lookout for deployments. She has, you know, many under her belt. So it was actually through a friend at work. She just brought the message to me and said, "Hey, Francis, look, they need somebody with your qualifications in this location. I've been there before. It's not a bad go. You should apply." And I was really hesitant because, you know, it's a big step and it's a long time to be away from home, and I was comfortable at home. But I just went for it, yeah.
So how long have you been away for now?
I left on November 2nd.
What do you find is the most difficult part of being away from home for that long?
Oh, good question. I think I mean, aside from being away from your family, I think everybody would say, you know, being away from home in general is not easy. But I think it's the routine becomes monotonous. We're in the desert. You can't just run to the store, hop in your car and run to the store. You know, there's a whole process if we're going to leave the base, for example. So I think it's just kind of like the general, you know, comfort and small things that you would do at home that I would miss the most, you know, grabbing a coffee from Tim Hortons or taking the dogs for a walk in the park, or maybe, you know, going hiking or seeing something other than sand.
And so what sort of activities or things do they have for you on the base to keep you entertained?
I have to say they do a really good job because the morale of the troops is really big. If you don't have good morale, you're not going to have mission success, you know, if you have a bunch of miserable people. So it can go from anything, like just for example, this last Saturday, we had a mini putt tournament where everybody created their own hole for their own little area that they created. And, there was 9 holes. And so there was a mini putt tournament. And, Easter, we're going to have an Easter egg hunt. And Christmas and New Year's, there was big celebrations, decorated camp. And then there's movie nights. We've got like a little theater that we've created here. And we have like movie nights, and there's like a really good popcorn machine. So that's always a plus. Yeah. And they have excursions, like you can sign up for 2 excursions a month, and it could be like you go to the mall or you go to a restaurant. They always scope out the restaurants first to make sure that they're clean and kind of up to standard. There's a camel farm. We went to see camels. So yeah, they do try to keep people engaged.
Yeah, that's good. That's important, I think, especially since you are there for such a long period. And so is it just Canadians, or is it a multinational base?
So, on Camp Canada, it's just Canadians. And we are on a Kuwaiti base. So it's a very large Kuwaiti base. And within that base, there's Camp Canada. There's an Italian base. And then there's also the Americans, which we call The Rock. They have a large base, a lot of infrastructure up there, way bigger than what the Canadians have. So that's where our dining facilities are. We go up there for our meals 3 times a day. And we're provided vehicles. And then there's a shuttle too, so you can get the shuttle bus too. But yeah.
Right. And so I guess, thinking back to, obviously it was a lot larger, but in Afghanistan, I heard about how they have Tim Hortons and TGI Fridays there. Do they have anything like any little coffee shops or anything like that on the base that you can go to just to enjoy that little bit of not military food?
They do, actually. On the American base, it's called a green bean. So it's very similar to Starbucks. And there's a Popeyes, and there's a Taco Bell, and there's a Cinnabon. And I think, I'm sure I'm missing one, but yeah. So, and then they have a couple of other little restaurants, like that they'll make like pizza. And then of course there's the regular Canucks, like they call it the PX here.
I find that's important because, I haven't done a deployment that long, but even being on a base for a course, like just eating the military food does get a little bit monotonous at times.
You are correct there.
And so do you have any really memorable stories from your career that you would like to share?
I mean, I think I think the biggest one, and it's not even big, it was kind of cool. Like we were sailing back from the Dominican Republic. We had just completed a naval warfare officer training. And we stopped in the Bermuda Triangle for a Swimex. So the ship stopped. The gray water had been turned off an hour before, just in case like sharks were trailing us. And everyone jumped in and had a swim. They didn't tell us that it was the Bermuda Triangle until afterwards, because they were, people, if they were superstitious or they didn't want to kind of freak people out. But it was actually really cool, and they had the people up on the bridge wings. They always have like the 50 cals mounted on the bridge wings, and there's somebody designated as like shark watch, right? And somebody has to watch out for sharks. And then there's the safety boat that's in the water with the swimmers in case something goes wrong. But yeah, just to kind of swim in the middle of the ocean and jump off the ship when there's nothing around and I don't know how many meters of ocean below you. It's actually really cool. Yeah.
I remember being little in school and just learning about the Bermuda Triangle and being probably way more terrified than I would need to be. So I don't know if I would have jumped in at the time or maybe been a little too nervous.
Well, it looks like every other bit of ocean that you could ever imagine. Yeah.
And that's something that a lot of civilians in Canada might not realize, sort of how often the Navy is out and deployed and doing sales to qualify new officers, or even just out on op reassurance or the Pacific deployments. Because it's something that the general population doesn't hear about that often.
That's right. Like the ships have been more in the newspaper recently. They seem to be doing, like they'll get the drug busts, they'll get the cocaines from the ships, and especially when they go down on Op Carib, like down into the Caribbean, and the fight against like the piracy. It's kind of interesting. But yeah, you're right. They do a lot and they go a lot of places. and the general population don't really know about it.
Yeah, so hopefully with these stories, people will learn a little bit more about what members of the military do, and specifically, obviously I have a soft spot for the Navy because I'm in the Navy as well, so I'd like to help get those stories out. And so when you switched over to HRA, did you stay reservist?
I did. Well, when I switched over to RMS clerk, I stayed as a reservist. And then it wasn't until 2015 that I took my component transfer.
I was going to ask, out of your reserve time, how much time was spent on full-time contracts?
Oh, wow. Probably. I was full-time since around 2003. 2003 to 2015 was just straight full-time, no breaks, really.
Interesting. Yeah, that's another thing that people might not realize is that if you're not sure whether or not you're going to enjoy the military, you can join the reserves and then have the possibility you could try out a full-time 2 or 3 year contract. And if you don't like it after that, then there's no requirement to stay any longer.
No, and there's so many opportunities in the reserves. Like they have so many great programs for students. Like they for 4 years, they get $2,000 reimbursed to them to help to put towards their education. So if they're in school, they get $2,000 a year towards their school. And then there's like guaranteed employment offers. So like for your first 4 years in the military, you're guaranteed employment for like 4 months. It's incredible. Like, as a Class A reservist, you get to pick and choose kind of when you want to work 3 hours a week. It's nothing, but it looks great on a resume.
Yeah, and especially for the students, I mean, finishing up the school year and then having to worry about getting a resume done, handing it out everywhere, going for interviews. I mean, that itself eats up so much time. And then some people don't want to hire a student just for the summer. So just knowing that you can finish school and literally the next day be on a full-time contract for the summer and not have to worry about that. Plus, like you said, their tuition reimbursements. I mean, that's a huge benefit.
Absolutely, yeah.
So how much time in your deployment do you have remaining?
Well, tomorrow I go to Spain on my HLTA for 17 days. So that's amazing. And then after that, we're here until about mid-May. So I've worked it out. I've got about like 65-ish days left in theater.
And so what advice would you give to women looking to join the military?
I would say just do it. Like if they're thinking about it, I would say just do it. Because you're going to do things and see things and meet people that you would never otherwise do, see, or meet. There's so many incredible opportunities that just your classmate next to you will never experience. And it doesn't have to be a lifetime commitment. A lot of people, I think, they think, the military equals forever. There's so many different like entry programs, on a part-time basis, full-time basis, basically whatever somebody is able to give, there's a spot for them. So it's so amazing. And the way that the military is moving towards, the inclusion and diversity and basically accepting everybody for who they are, women are needed in the CAF. And I would just tell anybody just to go for it. I mean, at the end of the day, if you don't like it, you can always get out, but I guarantee you that they'll probably stay for a couple of years for sure.
Awesome. I hope you enjoy your trip to Spain. And of course, hopefully you enjoy the rest of your deployment.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you so much for this interview today.
All right, Kate. Well, thank you very much again. And it was really nice talking with you.
My second guest is Sergeant Kylie Peterson. Kylie has served 16 years with the Canadian Armed Forces, initially joining the infantry before becoming a mobile support equipment operator. She is currently deployed to Kuwait on Op Impact as a road and vehicle safety specialist and the transport chief dispatcher. Kylie, welcome to the podcast again. We had some technical difficulties the first time, but welcome back.
Thank you very much for having me back.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Victoria, BC.
And did you have any military members in your family?
I did. My dad was a serving naval member. He was a hull tech. He didn't stay in long enough, but he did his time in Hawaii.
In Hawaii. Awesome.
Yeah.
That's one spot that I still haven't been to yet with the West Coast Navy.
It looks nice. I could use a posting there.
Mm-hmm. And so what sort of activities or sports were you into when you were growing up?
I played a lot of sports. Me and my brothers, we all played baseball, basketball, part of a She Got Game group, which is an all-female basketball training camp that went on for the summer. I played a lot of hockey and wrestling in high school. That was a good time.
So what made you want to get into wrestling in high school?
I think I just like any sport. So any chance to work out and have a good time and the camaraderie. And I think that's why I fit into the military so well. It kind of has that same sports aspect.
And so what sort of planted the seed in your head to want to join the military?
I didn't really know what I was going to do with my life out of high school. I worked a lot of dead-end jobs. And I saw an ad and saw a flag and was like, why not? So I went to the recruiter that day.
And how did that go, your experience with the recruiter?
My recruiter, his last name was Shrek. I'm not even kidding. He was massive. And he asked me what I wanted to do. And I said, infantry. And he was an Air Force guy and he thought I was insane. But he's like, good luck to you, kid. And shipped me off.
And so what made you choose infantry over all of the other trades that are available?
I think like any woman, you want to prove yourself, and you want to prove yourself in a male-dominated environment. So I think that was the best fit for me. And it turned out to be the best fit for me.
So how did that go? I mean, you were pretty young, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I was 18. And basic was a cinch. I used to get in trouble a lot for smiling and laughing. Battle school was interesting, and I also got in trouble for smiling and laughing. I have a tattoo on my arm that says smile. But in the end, I think it's just you prove it to yourself, and you can accomplish anything.
And so how were you treated by the men that were in the infantry at the time?
I carried a lot of weight. So I had the C6, and I think that goes for a lot of stories. You kind of get overburdened with tasks. I think they try to make you break a little bit extra compared to maybe a smaller guy. But yeah, I'd have all the ammo, the C6. I'd be running to and from. But yeah, you just push through, and the boys ended up loving me, so it worked out.
Yeah, for anyone listening that doesn't know, the C6 is pretty heavy to be carrying around. What was your favorite thing about being in the infantry?
The boys, hanging out with the guys and getting dirty and having fun. There's a lot of secret tears, but I think just, hanging out with the guys and having a good time. And when I trade transferred to mobile support equipment operator, it's also a male-dominated trade and has that same aspect where it's a lot of men, and it's a brotherhood in womanhood, I guess.
So when you were in the infantry, you mentioned carrying all of this heavy equipment and how it's very difficult. Were there ever any times during your training or day-to-day work where you were thinking, this is too hard for me, I don't want to do this?
100%. I think everybody would have that, male, female, whatever. It's a gut check. I wrestled a guy for an apple once because we were starving. So I won.
And so what do you tell yourself in those moments that enables you to keep going?
That I'm not hurting as much as the guy next to me, right? There's always somebody in more pain or more mentally fatigued, and you're not special.
During those moments, you know, when people do quit, I think it's almost like a very rushed decision. And then afterwards, they regret it. So it's just, you know, you're sort of worn down, you're fatigued. Sometimes you can't think straight because of that fatigue. Mm-hmm. And then you just end up thinking like, oh, it would be much better if I was on the couch or easier.
Much easier.
Mm-hmm. And then you're sitting there and you're like, oh no, actually, I wish I was back there.
And that's it. I think when you miss a course or you get out of the military, you miss that aspect of hanging out with the troops, the people. And I think if you lean on one another, I think you can accomplish anything for sure.
Yeah, there is a lot to be said about that sort of shared like suffering and hardship. It brings people closer together.
100% it does.
And so What made you do the switch from the infantry?
My spouse is also in the military, is an MWO Air Force. The trade just wasn't driving. She was going out to Halifax, and I had to make the choice either to stay in Edmonton or go to Halifax, and I chose family.
Mm-hmm. And I've had this discussion with others before who have a spouse in the military, and it's the common theme is sort of that you've got to pick basically one spouse whose career takes priority.
You do, and there's a lot of give and take. I have also excelled because she's been posted so often, and I have followed. I've been exposed to Air Force, Navy, Army, the full spectrum of postings, and I think that makes me a better soldier because I understand different aspects of the CAF across the board. So actually, it's worked out in my benefit.
And are you still Reg Force, or did you switch to reserve?
No, Reg Force.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I know in some cases one spouse will switch to reserve because it does allow a little bit more flexibility. Like in my case, my husband is Reg Force and I'm reserve, so it does sort of give me that flexibility where if he gets posted, then it's just a matter of me looking for a Class B job in that area, but I'm not stuck to one spot and worried about, whether or not the career manager is going to post me to the same spot.
I think the reserves is a great opportunity for a lot of people. Reg Force is difficult, especially two Reg Force spouses, but reserves gives you that opportunity to serve your country and build on those life skills and, push yourself further than you thought you'd ever go. And then you go to work somewhere, hoity-toity. And then on the weekend, you're hanging out with the guys, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, when I was in Toronto, actually, there were a lot of people who were like lawyers and bankers. Yeah. And then on the weekends, they would be like a bosun at the Navy Reserves.
Like a private.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. How did you decide which trade to choose when you switched?
A purple trade. So a purple trade is something that can be posted pretty much anywhere. And I felt that was best for my family. And it kind of still had that infantry aspect. We like to call ourselves infant truckers. So we still do a lot of the soldiering skills, but it's something that affords me to be able to post it across the country.
And how long would you be gone for if you're, I guess, driving a truck somewhere? Are you gone for weeks at a time or is it days at a time?
So there is truckers that do tractor trailer, and 100% they go across the country and they can be gone for weeks. I never got that call. Doesn't really interest me. But we spent a lot of time in the field, just like any field exercises, for months on end. Good old Wainwright.
So is this your first deployment?
It is my first deployment, yeah.
Where are you deployed to right now?
We are in Kuwait and Op Impact.
And what is your particular role during this deployment? I
am a road and vehicle safety specialist. So I manage vehicle safety and people's qualifications, ensure safety on base, collisions. I investigate collisions with the MPs. And just as like a senior MSC op, mobile support equipment operator, I just oversee a crew of 8 men. And we just get the job done.
Awesome. And how are you enjoying the deployment so far?
Oh, it's the best. Yeah, I have a really great crew.
How long have you been in country for?
4 months. So we got 2 months to go.
Okay. So it's sort of a standard deployment length.
Yes. Yeah.
What's the hardest part of being away from home for so long?
I don't know. My home life is awesome. I have 2 sons who are fully supported at home in Victoria. My family is in Victoria. I don't think there's any hard part of being deployed with today's technology.
Mm-hmm. And so your family is very supportive of you being away then, I'd imagine.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, I think that makes a big difference, definitely, when you're, it's less stress when you're deployed because you're not worried about that, your family back home.
Yeah, not at all.
Just going back, you mentioned like growing up that you played all of these different sports. Did you play any sports within the CAF sports program?
Don't we all join the CAF to be semi-pro sports players? Yeah, I think that is a big win about being in the CAF. Is being able to play any sport. I think there's a sport for every season, right? My spouse likes to disagree because I go away a lot on nationals or regionals. But yeah, hockey, baseball, or softball, basketball, volleyball. I even tried curling, right? I don't know. Squash. Yeah, just all the sports. Why not?
I like that grappling is sort of making an appearance in the CAF now, so that's
It
really
is.
exciting. I wish that boxing was still a thing. When you walk into the gym, I know.
The gym and you see the boxing on the wall.
Yeah, like the really old school pictures of that.
Yeah.
And it's like, I guess I can understand their perspective, with the concussions. There is a little bit more risk involved, but I think that knowing some of my American counterparts, and there's some really, really good boxing programs in the US, like in the US Army, kind of makes me wish we had it up here, but.
I definitely wish we had like Muay Thai or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, and any sport, I'm totally game. Like if you're like, hey Kylie, you want to play? I'd be like, yup.
Do you guys teach the other nations how to play hockey over there?
No, we had a tournament here. The Dutch actually won. They did. They beat the Canadians. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just deployed we were over in Africa, and the Dutch were over there. So we taught them American football, and we had a football game, and we were very excited that we would beat them. They ended up winning, but they kind of pulled off some rugby-esque type moves on us.
It happens. We got some redemption, so I'm hoping dodgeball, the Canadians can really send it.
I'll be rooting for you. So what do you enjoy the most about being in the CAF?
The people. The people I get to meet. Transport is an amazing place because everybody has to come through for something. So I have the chance to meet super higher ups, or a private coming walking through the door for his first 404s, like his first driver's license for the military. I have a chance to talk to people, and that is my most favorite.
And do you have any particularly like memorable or funny stories from your career or deployment, maybe?
I think it would be in Gagetown in the middle of winter. We were with the Americans who showed up from California. They showed up with no winter gear, steel-toe boots, and plastic snowshoes. Our whole platoon gave them every last piece of kit that we had extra, so they wouldn't freeze to death. And we had to do recce's around Gagetown, and they lasted 5 hours. Their snowshoes broke. They all went back to their tent, and their commander came out and said, "We're no longer doing this exercise. We quit."
Yeah, I can't even imagine the shock to their system from going from California.
Are we allowed to quit? I'm cold. I don't want to be here either. But yeah, they didn't have enough food, and we were kind of sleep messed, and it was a really fun exercise.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I can imagine sunny California to Gagetown in the winter.
They were sad looking. It was just funny watching them try to walk in the snow, and just one snowshoe would break after another and they'd sink, and they're just they're freaking out. Yeah, it was pretty funny.
And then so my final question, what advice would you give to women looking to join the military? And in your case specifically, I guess the combat arms.
Don't sell yourself short. You're definitely stronger than you think. Your mind is weak, but your body is strong. So don't give up. Even on your hardest days, just remember that somebody else is having a harder time than you. And you should just go for it.
Perfect. Kylie, thank you so much. I'm glad that we were able to do this interview this time, and that the Wi-Fi gods were on our side today.
All right. I appreciate it, Kate. Thank you so much.
My third guest is Major Rebecca Wheaton-Sparkes. Rebecca joined the Canadian Forces in 2007 through ROTP as a Royal Canadian Air Force physiotherapy officer. Throughout her 14 years as a Reg Force PTO, she spent time with all 3 elements in CFB Esquimalt, 19 Wing Comox, and 2 Field Ambulance in Petawawa, Ontario. In 2013, she deployed to Kabul, Afghanistan on op attention. In 2020, she switched to the primary reserves as a Royal Canadian Air Force intelligence officer and was posted to 1 Canadian Air Division in Winnipeg. She is currently deployed on Op Foundation in Qatar as the Canadian Intelligence Liaison Officer. Rebecca, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here from halfway around the world.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here virtually with you.
Where did you grow up?
So I'm a military brat. So I always say I didn't really grow up anywhere, and I grew up everywhere. I was born in Halifax, Nova Scotia, but I lived there for a very short period of time. And then we moved to Borden, Ontario, then followed to Goose Bay, Labrador, then Gagetown, New Brunswick, and then Winnipeg, Manitoba. And that's where I kind of finished most of my junior high and high school and went to university there. So Winnipeg is technically where I grew up, but I don't really consider that home.
So which parent was in the military?
My dad.
And what did he do in the forces?
My dad started as a MSc op, so a heavy equipment operator in the Air Force. And he did 35 years and finished as a chief. So pretty excited.
Awesome. Did that sort of plant the seed in your mind early on in your life that you might want to join the forces?
It's funny because so I have one sister, and all growing up, like I don't remember a single time when my dad ever said to my sister or I, like, you should join the military. And ironically enough, both of us did join the military. So, I mean, maybe subconsciously it did, but no, there was never any like pressure or instigation from either of my parents for that.
And so what did your path look like to get there? Did you sort of join right out of high school, or did you go to maybe civilian university first and then decide a little later on that you wanted to join?
So I did 3 years of university. I wanted to originally be a dentist. And so I did 3 years of undergrad, and then I applied to dental school, and I decided that I probably needed a backup plan in case I didn't make it. So I also applied to physical therapy. And I got into physical therapy, but not into dentistry. So started down that path, which was 3 years. So I did the first year on my own. So that was 4 years of university. And then after that, my money ran out. Going into my second year of physical therapy, I applied for a student loan, but I was actually denied because my dad apparently made too much money, even though my parents were living in Nova Scotia, and I was living in Winnipeg, and they weren't helping me, but apparently they still made too much money, so I didn't get approved. So I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? So I decided to join the military so that they could pay for it. And that's how it happened.
And I guess taking a little step back, you said you got involved in physical therapy. So were you involved in sports when you were younger? Is that what made you want to go down that path?
Yeah, so I definitely played sports throughout all of junior high and high school. But honestly, the way I got into PT was when I was applying for dentistry and decided that I should have a backup. I went onto the University of Manitoba website and looked at everything they had to offer. And I found PT, and it was basically like, oh, I like going to physical therapy. That could be a cool job. And so that's how I applied to it. But honestly, it was a blessing in disguise because I think I was going to be much happier as a PT versus a dentist.
So the program that you applied to through the forces, would that have been the ROTP program?
Exactly. Yes, it was.
For the listeners that might not know what that is, do you want to give just a quick blurb about what it is?
Yeah, so basically the military will pay for you to go to university. You can either do RMC, which is our military college, or a civilian university. RMC doesn't offer any medical degrees, so I went through CiVU. And basically the program is for every month they pay of schooling, you owe them 2 months in return. So they paid for 2 years of school for me. I was enrolled in the CAF during that time as an officer cadet, making a salary. They paid for everything for school. And then after that, I owe them approximately 4 years. So pretty great program that not a lot of people know of. And I always try to encourage people to look into that.
Yeah, that's just what I was going to say is I think a lot of people aren't really aware of that program. So now when you were applying for this, were you thinking that you were only going to do sort of the bare minimum of time afterwards? Or did you have this idea that you were going to spend a long time in the Canadian Forces?
At the beginning, I wasn't really sure because I wasn't entirely set on my path yet. But because my dad was in, I knew what the military looked like, and I liked that life. So it was what I knew. So I wasn't opposed to it, but I certainly didn't have my mind made up that early back then.
So in the Canadian Forces, as a physical therapist, what does the day-to-day life look like, and what are some other sort of tasks or maybe deployments that you might be on?
So physio is very, very high demand in the military. I mean, I think that's pretty common sense. People are getting hurt constantly. So the first couple of years as a PT or a PTO, so physical therapy officer, you're mostly seeing patients. And depends which clinic you work at, but you have a tempo of usually like 60 minutes for a new assessment, 30 minutes for follow-up, and just every day you're seeing, 14 to 16 patients. And then as you kind of progress and become like a captain or more of like a senior captain, you start to take on a lot of administrative roles, because physio in the military is one of the smallest trades. There's only 35 PTOs in the whole CAF. So it's really, really small. And it's subsidized by civilian public servants and contract workers. So what that means is the military PTOs at the clinics end up becoming the IC or the person in charge. And so you end up having a much greater administrative management type role as you progress.
And how involved are you with the sports programs, like maybe the sort of regional and national sports and also CISM sports?
So there's a separate program in the CAF called CAF-ATP, which is the Canadian Armed Forces Athletic Trainers Program. And although it's not a physio-derived program, it is led by physios. So anyone in the CAF can actually join. There's different levels of trainers, and basically we provide oversight at different like regional, national, and CISM level events. So I'm a level 3 trainer, which means I can train all the way up to CISM. I used to be a CISM athlete in playing volleyball, but now I have transitioned to the training side. So my most recent event was with the men and women's basketball teams, the first ever 3-on-3 competition in Germany this past June, so June 2022. It was really cool. It was an excellent experience.
Did you switch now? Are you an INTO?
I am. So in 2020, I switched from the Reg Force physical therapy officer to a primary reserve intelligence officer now.
Okay, and what made you want to make that switch?
Physio in the military, like I said before, is a very small trade, and there's not a lot of progression. And so, quite honestly, the career goals that I have were just not going to happen staying in the physio world. I want to deploy. I want to do an outcan. I want to get promoted. I want to be a higher level leader in the military, and that's just not going to happen staying in physio. So unfortunately, having a physio degree doesn't open a lot of possibilities when switching trades. But intelligence was one door that did open, and it's awesome. Like, I absolutely love it. I'm so happy I made the switch.
And what does it look like to become fully qualified as an intelligence officer? How long is the training for that?
So when I went through the training, there's one career course called BIOC, so the Basic Intelligence Officer course. It's held in Kingston. That's where the INT school is. At that time, it was 4 months. However, the program is being actually revamped because it's been quite some time. So there actually just was a board review a couple months ago. And in the future, it's probably going to look like more like a year-long program. But for me, it was a 4-month course in Kingston.
And now, is that training the same across the Army, Navy, and Air Force? And is it the same course for reservists and Reg Force?
So up until a few years ago, intelligence was a purple trade, and we were in all elements, so Army, Navy, Air Force. So then it split. So I'm a RCAF, or an Air Force intelligence officer. So the course, the first mod is the common phase. So all elements do the same common phase. And then the second part is actually split up to element specific. So I am much more savvy in Air Force, aircraft, air weapons versus ships and tanks.
And what made you want to go the Air Force route for that?
I was always in the Air Force as a physio as well, and I like the Air. My dad was Air Force, so yes, I am slightly biased. My spouse is Air Force. My brother-in-law is Air Force. My dad was Air Force, so I definitely am more keen to be blue. But also, I really like the operations that the Air Force does. A lot of people think that the Army is what deploys the most, but that's not true. The Army does big deployments, but short. They only do one or so a year, whereas the Air Force is constantly doing ops throughout the entire world. So a lot of people don't know that, and I like that tempo of the Air Force.
And is this your first deployment as an INTO?
Yes, as an INTO, but not my first deployment.
What was your first deployment?
My first deployment was with actually the U.S. Navy on the USNS Mercy, which is a hospital ship. So they have one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast. So in 2010, I deployed with the USNS Mercy throughout Malaysia and Indonesia, providing humanitarian aid and medical assistance to third world countries. And then in 2013, I deployed to Afghanistan as part of Op Attention on the last roto. And on that deployment, it was actually quite interesting because I wasn't in Kandahar, which is what most people think of when they think of Afghanistan. I was deployed in Kabul, and I was part of a medical team that was there 100% to actually train the Afghan National Army, the ANA, on different medical professions. So in Afghanistan, they actually don't have physical therapy. So we created a trade, a physio tech trade for them for rehab purposes. And so my job there was to actually, it was more like a TDO job, like a training and development officer, because we actually created courseware and we put students through the first course.
Those sound like two super interesting deployments. What was it like to deploy with the Americans?
It's good. It's definitely challenging. I'm not going to lie. They just do things differently than we do, but it's always a good experience. We learn both from each other. The Americans are just so big. There's more C-17s on the runway here in Qatar than we have in our entire fleet in the CAF. So it's just a different world. They are so specialized in their jobs that, whereas someone in the CAF might have 5 different roles, the Americans have 5 different people doing those jobs. So it's just kind of learning who's who in the zoo and how the Americans work.
Where are you located for this deployment?
So I'm in the Al Udeid Air Force Base, which is in Qatar. And this is the main CAOC, which is basically the aerospace center for the entire Middle East. Basically, the CAOC controls all of the aircraft throughout the entire area of operations, which includes Qatar, Kuwait, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Lebanon.
And how long is this deployment for you?
For the rest of the Canadians, it's 6 months. I'm here for 7, only because I went to Kuwait first. I spent a bit of time there because our air picture in Kuwait has recently changed. So Operation Impact, we are now in an episodic rotation, meaning that we only do that tour every couple of months versus being there 100% of the time. So I was there to kind of do a bit of an evaluation on what the INT picture looks like, and then came to Qatar. So 7 months total.
Okay, and what do you enjoy the most so far about this deployment?
Definitely working with all the coalition members. It's really cool. We have obviously Americans, we have Brits, Spaniards, Dutch, Germans, Italian, French, Aussies, no Kiwis, they left. Hopefully I'm not missing anybody else, but it's really exciting to meet people from different militaries, see how they do things, and to see how we do things the same, actually. That's always really interesting, because sometimes we can get frustrated in the bureaucracy of the military, but then you can see that it's actually not just us, it's most militaries.
That's true. Yeah, I find having traveled around to some different locations, it's kind of interesting to see how much we have in common with our counterparts sometimes.
Absolutely, definitely.
So you were the one that was sort of, I guess, instrumental in making this episode happen. What gave you the idea for it?
Well, actually, a friend of mine who follows your podcast, she was the one several months ago. She actually reached out to me and said that I should reach out to you. But I wasn't really keen on that. But then we stood up a DAG here for JTF Central, which is the Defense Advisory Group. So I am the champion for the women's team of that group. And we wanted to do something special for International Women's Day. And following your podcast and seeing how you highlight all the amazing work of different women, I just thought that this would be a really cool idea, and hopefully you would agree. And just to highlight some of the amazing women that are deployed here in the Middle East with the CAF.
I was so excited when I got your email, and it was also a challenge for me to just sort of put together this podcast with multiple women. And not only that, but just being in the different time zones. Sometimes, like I've sent you emails that say tomorrow, but then I'm like, oh, wait, but tomorrow is today for her. So hopefully it's not messing up the schedule.
Absolutely. And you've been awesome, because I actually don't even try to figure out the time zone. You just told me what it was. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, there is an online calculator that I can just go in and punch where I'm located and where you're located, and it'll just give me the time. So that has been pretty helpful for me. Do you have any particular memorable stories or experiences from your career, maybe on deployments or back home?
I think that most of my memorable experiences, when I think about it just off the top of my head, have to do, obviously, physio, because that's the majority of my career. I had some really amazing patients throughout my time where, different soldiers had significant injuries. I worked with a paraplegic patient. I worked with amputee patients. I worked with a SAR-tech who fell off a mountain literally and, broke every bone in his body. A really great friend of mine had a parachute accident and shattered her pelvis. And so working with those people and kind of getting them back to the things that they love and back to being functional in the military or not is definitely a highlight. As well as there's a program in the military, which I know but so Soldier On, which is for wounded, ill and injured members. And definitely one of the highlights is seeing the patients that I have treated compete in the Invictus Games. I got to see that happen a couple times, including a very good friend of mine, win gold in the power lifting contest. And that's absolutely a highlight of my career, just seeing them defeat all the odds and get back to their new normal. That's for sure it, yeah.
When I lived in Toronto, our reserve unit there helped out at the Invictus Games. So we got to be not presenting the medals, but we got to walk out holding the tray that the medals were on. So I got to see a lot of the events there. And it was so, I don't even really have words for it, but it was just so inspiring to watch that and to watch those athletes. And then also just sort of behind the scenes, see the camaraderie between everyone from all sorts of different countries sort of coming together with those common interests. And, they're sort of around their people again.
Absolutely. It's like giving me shivers just thinking about it. I have two exceptional friends, Mimi Poulain and Krista Seguin, who both are gold medal winners at the Invictus Games in that Toronto one that you're talking about. And yeah, watching them win their events was just awe-inspiring. Amazing.
And so for you, what are your future goals for your career?
Well, I definitely would like to see how I could progress because that was never really an option for me before. I recently got promoted, and so that's just kind of opened some doors. And being a reservist, especially, like I'm very passionate about being a reservist now. There's a lot of really exciting higher leadership positions that I would maybe like to take on one day. And the other big career goal I have is actually just promoting culture change. It's very in the news, it's the flavor of the day, but I don't want it to just be a short-term thing. Like I really am passionate about promoting women in the CAF. One of the most passionate things I'm about is using, gender-free, inclusive language. It's something that really kind of hit hard when I switched to intelligence. And I just really want to try and advocate and promote and be a leader on that. So that's my big goal, I guess.
When it comes to that culture change, how have you seen it change or progress since when you first joined the CAF?
Well, I think that people are much more aware. And even if they're not aware, they're very, for the most part, people are really accepting when you do say something. So, I'm constantly cheekily reminding people if they say, oh, the commander, he, blah, blah, blah. And, I'll just kind of casually say like, oh, or she, because commanders can be women too. And I don't think that people are intentionally trying to exclude women. But when I say something like that, I do actually see people trying then to correct it the next time, which is really all you can ask, I think. And so just that openness, I do think that is changing, as well as just trying to be more cognizant of how our actions do affect things and different minority groups. I think that is actually changing quite for like positively.
Yeah, even I've been in for 15 years now, and I've definitely noticed changes from when I first joined. So I think we're definitely trending in the right direction now.
Yeah, and sometimes people say like we're swinging too far in the opposite direction. And that might be so, but my comeback to that is I think we actually need to swing a little bit too far to kind of land back in the middle. So I think that's what's going to happen, and I definitely think we're on the right track.
Awesome. And my final question, which is the same one that I ask everyone, what advice would you give to women looking to join the Canadian Forces, or I guess the military of their country?
Number one is just do it, because don't be scared. I think that there's a lot of misinformation or just unknown information. And so if you educate yourself on it, I think you would be surprised how easy it is or how accessible it can be. The military has so much to offer. I'm a prime example. I never thought that I would not be a physio, and here I am doing intelligence. And maybe down the line, if I don't want to do intelligence, there's other opportunities that I can explore too. And so I just really think that the military has so much to offer, but we need to educate and kind of advocate for that. So get educated, look into it, and be a lady boss. That's my big thing. We need more lady bosses out there.
That is amazing advice. Thank you so much for your time today. I'm so glad that we finally got to connect. My fourth guest is Sergeant Mary Fandrey. Mary has been in the Canadian Armed Forces for 15 years. She's an artillery reservist who works at 41 Canadian Brigade Group headquarters while at home, but she is currently deployed with the Canadian Training and Assistance Team to Amman, Jordan on Operation Impact. This role includes being embedded in the Jordanian Armed Forces Female Engagement Team Platoon, mentoring, coaching, and training officers and NCOs on leadership, planning, and fieldcraft. Mary has also deployed domestically on Op Lentis in 2017 to fight the wildfires in British Columbia. Okay, so Mary, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So I always like to start from the very beginning. Where did you grow up?
I grew up a little bit all over the place. I'm a military kid, so my dad was a naval engineering officer and then a naval architect later. So we were on a couple out camp postings, grew up a lot in Halifax, and then most of my teenage years in Ottawa. So a little bit of everywhere.
Oh, that's pretty neat. Where were the outcamp postings?
Well, I was born in England, in Plymouth, and then we lived in London for a couple years as like in my early teenage years, and then a little bit in DC, in Washington, DC as well.
Okay, that sounds super interesting. Actually, I just spent my whole life growing up in Halifax, so a little more boring than that. And then, so what sort of activities were you involved in when you were younger?
A little bit of everything. I think my parents like to keep me really busy, so I was doing a lot of sports. I did soccer growing up. I was competitive with kayaking, did some gymnastics, a little bit of piano, ballet, lots to just kind of keep me busy and keep me moving, I think.
Did you know from an early age that you wanted to join the military?
Not really. I don't think it was like we were really immersed in the kind of military culture. We lived in PMQs when we were in Halifax. I don't know if I ever saw it for myself. I just don't think it was ever that I had ever really thought about it, but it was definitely like the culture and the community of the military was something that was always such a strong part of my life that it sort of, when it did happen, it sort of made sense that it did.
How did it happen? What made you decide to join?
I joined early. I was 16, so it was one of my first jobs. And it was really just kind of, I guess, well, it was the time that you start looking for like employment, I guess. But I wanted something. I wanted some sort of kind of part-time job that would give me different opportunities, open doors, give me something that was a little bit unique, a little bit of an adventure, something challenging, a little bit active, a little bit off the beaten track, I guess.
I think that's probably a lot of the same reasons why most people join. How did you choose your trade?
Honestly, it was the closest unit to me. I didn't know anything about the artillery. My dad had suggested it. He knew that I was interested in different leadership stuff. He knew that I was like, I wanted to do stuff in the outdoors, be active. So I think he saw the Army as being something that would be positive for me. I don't think we knew much about the artillery specifically, but knew that it was one of the combat arms and had heard good things about the unit. It was the unit in Ottawa, it's 30th Field. So it was, and it was right down the street.
Since you were 16, I'm assuming this was the reserves.
Yeah.
Are you still a reservist or are you Reg Force now?
No, reserves my whole career.
Awesome. And so what was that like as a 16-year-old going in to join, it's the reserves, but it's still the Army. And I assume very sort of male dominated at that time and a very highly disciplined field of work.
Yeah, it was definitely a shock. So I joined in 2008. So it was just about 15 years ago, I guess. It was always kind of cool. I think the unit that I was with, it had a lot of strong female leaders in it at the time. And I think it still does. But it was, it was like, you just kind of got on board with it. It was really fun, actually. I didn't know it was a job, really, until I didn't really know that it was like a paid opportunity. I kind of thought that it was sort of a volunteer or like an experience thing. So it was actually a fun surprise when I started getting paid for it. And like paid a decent amount for a 16-year-old. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah, probably a lot more of an exciting summer job than some of your peers, I would imagine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's rolling around in the dirt, especially those first couple of years doing the BMQ and then your SQ and the DP1. And it's obviously like firing the big guns. That's what I was doing right after high school. So it's a little bit different than what everybody else was doing before going off to their first year of university.
Yeah, definitely. And so did you work full-time contracts or do you have a civilian job as well?
Not in the first few years. The last kind of half of my career, I've been full-time. So I am now. I work, when I'm back home, I work at the headquarters for my formation at 41 Brigade. And then before that, I've had a couple full-time contracts before that as well.
Did you go to college or university after high school?
Yeah, so I am actually just finishing my degree. I'd done most of my degree the first couple of years, and then have taken courses part-time while I'm working full-time to finish my psychology degree.
So do you do distance education for that?
Yeah, with Athabasca in Alberta.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I'm sort of slowly picking away at a degree through RMC as well. I'm doing the Bachelor of Military Arts and Science, so it's slowly but surely I might be about 80 by the time I finish.
That's what it feels like. That's really interesting, actually. It's while I was on this deployment that I had heard about the RMC distance degrees. And I was transferring. I'm still kind of thinking about it, but I didn't know that they'd offered a distance degree, but it's a really interesting opportunity.
It's neat too, because I mean, obviously they have courses that aren't military related, but a lot of the content, they sort of relate it to something military somehow, right? So it does just kind of make it a little bit more interesting. I just did an English course, so some of the short stories were sort of written by soldiers and military people, so it just kind of made it a little more tolerable.
Yeah, it kind of brings it's familiar.
Definitely. And so is this your first deployment, or have you done deployments prior to this?
My first international deployment, yeah. I did a short deployment, a domestic deployment with the BC wildfires in 2017. But this is my first expeditionary. So that's very exciting.
Just going back, what did you do during the wildfire deployment?
So I was a section commander. And so a lot of it was we were trained with the wildfire service, and just kind of basic skills and basic kind of putting out the hot spots. And so we were clearing the area around Williams Lake. Yeah. And so the wildfire had gone through. And so it's really interesting the way they employ with that. The wildfire service that do that full time, they kind of take a platoon almost that size. And so a couple of them, they'll be the experts and they'll be telling us where we're going. They'll do all the planning, the sort of strategic work. And then they use us kind of as their force multiplier. So you take one person's expertise, you give us the bare skills so that we can be effective and safe. And then suddenly that one person with expertise has an entire platoon's worth of manpower.
I would imagine that would be pretty rigorous, tough work doing that.
Yeah, I mean, it's they're long days when you go out. It's we operate out of the same base, so it would be, I think there were 11 or 12 platoons that were working, and each platoon kind of went off and did their own thing every day. And we rotated on a work-rest cycle, so some days you'd be taking the bus out, or the NSVS is out an hour. Sometimes it was 2 or 3 hours, and you'd spend 4 or 5 hours working and then rip back. And then everybody was back at camp before the end of the day. But it was cool. It was definitely a different experience.
If you hear about the military helping out with winter storms and floods, but it's only kind of the last couple of years since I live in BC now that I've heard about more of the CAF helping out when there are wildfires. So this deployment now, can you give me just a little brief summary of what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm currently embedded directly with the female engagement team. So it's an all-female platoon that is a force enabler for the Quick Reaction Force Brigade of the Jordanian Armed Forces. So I am here in Amman, Jordan right now. The way they employ this, the FET platoon is what they're called. They're employed specifically as an all-female platoon to handle culturally sensitive situations where it's most appropriate to be handled by women within the cultural context that we're existing in right now. So what that looks like is medical and humanitarian, dealing with women and children, refugees, checkpoints, that kind of mentality.
Okay, interesting. And so how long have you been there so far?
So we've been here for 3 months, and we'll be here for another 3. I think we're about halfway through the deployment.
Is it just Canadians they're mentoring, or are you working with women from other nations as well, mentoring the Jordanians?
It's actually a little bit of both. So our unit here is the Canadian Training and Assistance Team Jordan. So we are very small. It's about 25, 26 of us that we're all Canadians. And so we have different embed units within the JAF, the Jordanian Armed Forces. But through those embeds, there are other partner nations, some other NATO countries that also have kind of shorter term training opportunities. They're also in the country. So in the last month or so, we were working with a team from the UK, and they were here for about 3 weeks that we're doing a collaboration training with the FET as well. So in the way that we're here for a longer period of time and we're training as a consistent presence, this team of 4 had come in for a very specific purpose to work for I think it was 3 weeks total. So they came in, kind of ripped in and ripped out quickly. But we're, in the sense that we're employed here in this kind of persistent presence, that's unique to Canada for Jordan.
Okay, interesting. And so the women that you're training, are they fairly new to the military, or have they been in for a long time, or is it sort of a mixed platoon of varying experience?
So it's a little bit of both. We the FET platoon in its current kind of iteration some of them have been in for like 15, 16 years, and they've had lots of experience in the JAF. They were deployed all over the world. They've been to, they were doing some of the deployments in Afghanistan. They've deployed, like we have some that are deployed in like Gaza. So they're kind of all over the place. But they're at a point right now where they're also conducting a kind of decentralized training course, basic training course. So we have a really good mix of very experienced and senior NCOs, a good core of very experienced corporals that are then also training a whole course load of brand new members that are brand new to the JAF.
You mentioned integration. How are they sort of received by the men in the military in Jordan?
It's definitely from the top down. The mandate is that women are in the JAF and we're looking for female integration, and it's how to employ women and give them that sort of equality of opportunity. It's a really big deal to the king in Jordan. His daughter's really cool. She's a fighter pilot, which is wild, which I think is one of the coolest things. So there's definitely a lot of support. There's a lot of support from our senior ranks and definitely from the junior ranks as well. But what integration and what female integration looks like here isn't necessarily what we do in the CAF. So the idea of female integration at home is, we are entirely embedded in, we have all of the same opportunities, and we're right in there. You have mixed male-female units, and there are some of those here, but in this really heavy infantry brigade that I'm working with, that's not quite the case, but it's not necessarily intended as a kind of limiting factor. It's within the cultural context of the world that we're living in right now. The idea of the role of a soldier is so far from the traditional female role as it is here that the goal isn't necessarily having, mixed male-female battalions on the male battalion side. It's how do we use our skills and our talents to build the team up together in a way that's effective within the cultural context.
I guess coming from the Canadian side, going back to being back home, how do you find yourself on this deployment? Is this something that you're assigned to, or do you volunteer for it?
So I am a reservist. So this is one that I had asked for, and it's a position that a colleague of mine had done 5 years ago or so, or a little bit less than that, 3 years ago maybe. And I'd heard about it from her, and it was a really cool opportunity for her, and it was a very unique one. It's a very unique deployment in and of itself. So it was something that I definitely wanted to be involved in. Back home, I do a lot of teaching. And teaching leadership courses is something that I have become very passionate about. And being involved in that institution of developing conscious leaders and leaders that really try to develop their subordinates in a meaningful way, and with respect and that sort of intentional leadership where everything sort of has a purpose and where you're constantly finding ways to be a meaningful mentor. That's something that back home has been really important to me. So the idea of being able to do that here in theater while also working towards our sort of global initiative towards female integration is definitely something that's been very rewarding for me.
Is this sort of a highly competitive position to get? Is it in demand back home to get on one of these deployments?
So I think it's sort of one of those hidden ones. I think that not a lot of people know about it. It's not super sought after, but I don't think that's because it's undesirable. It's definitely it's a very cool position, but it's one that I think a lot of people don't necessarily know about.
Yeah, so I'd seen pictures on social media of the female engagement team training this Jordanian platoon, and I'm like, that's so cool. But since I'm Navy, I guess I don't hear about when there are opportunities to do this kind of thing, from the little that I know about it. And I have done some shorter international deployments training people. And I do find it's rewarding, and it's important to go over to other countries and just see how everything works over there, see what their military is like, and just experience other cultures as well is very important.
Yeah, it's a really different perspective. It's just very interesting. We were on the range earlier this week, and this basic training, most of this instructors are male instructors. And so for a certain part of the range, the female officer that was running the range kicked all the male instructors off the range to give the women a little bit more privacy. And the female NCOs of the trained platoon were coaching and mentoring the firing line. And so it's kind of a 1-for-1 ratio, coach to fire. And it was really interesting to see the shift in the vibe from that. And we had with the male instructors, it was very familiar. That was something, a lot of the very firm commands, a lot of control, a lot of the like hyper masculine, like, being a soldier sort of tones. And like, obviously it's all in Arabic, so you don't understand the exact words, but what's being said because it looks like our range. People are reacting in the way that they would to certain commands that we would see on a CAF range. But it was really interesting the shift when the female NCOs took over. They are also very professional, but you saw the energy drop a little bit, and they were speaking with like more warmth, and there was a lot of patience, and you kind of saw where that sort of innate ability to teach and mentor young women. And I don't know if that's something to do with the culture here, that it's just they'd be more receptive, but you saw these abilities start to come out, and you saw the girls that were firing, that's the first or second time firing ever. And they got a lot more comfortable with it, and they're being coached onto it. And it's not a conventional way that we'd see soldiers being taught, but it was also very effective. And saw them getting effective shots on target, and you saw them closing up their groupings, and they're explaining things in a way that isn't the kind of yelly, screamy thing that we see sometimes. But there was also like, they still maintained that command and control element that you need to have for safety on range. Anyway, it was really interesting to watch.
Yeah, it is interesting how something like that on a range in Canada might not be very effective at all, but taken to a different culture, like, becomes very effective. So when you're there, like, do you spend a lot of time on the base, or is there opportunities to go out and sort of explore the country and have some cultural experiences?
So we are very lucky. We aren't actually on a base. We have sort of like an apartment complex. And so that's all secured, and it's just the Canadian team. And so we're right in central Amman. So we do have a certain level of freedom of movement that you wouldn't necessarily see from Kuwait and some of the other bases. We do have our walkout policy. So we do have the ability to kind of move in and around Amman within certain kind of restrictions. And then different things like we get to kind of do the R&Rs, the like rest days. We can put up the like con-ops to the CO. And he can also authorize us to move about the country with certain authorizations. So things like seeing Petra is one of the 7 wonders of the world. So we got to see Petra, which is very cool.
Right. Actually, I was just going to ask about that. So that's another sort of added bonus to that deployment. And so what do you enjoy the most about this type of work?
It's just being able to have a meaningful impact. I think that's something that, sometimes we talk about this, sometimes the supporting effort. So you don't necessarily see the result of what we're doing. But when we're in this role, like this is what we're here to do, right? We're part of the whole of government approach to the Middle East, which is working on capacity building, right? The whole idea of what we're doing in the Middle East all together is building this capacity for local security forces, which is like Lebanon and in Iraq and in Jordan, with the overall intent of the enduring defeat of Daesh. And this is what that looks like. And so you have the mixture of working with women and having a meaningful impact on female integration, which is so cool, and sort of that once in a lifetime opportunity within the military, but also having meaningful effect for them and for this military. Everything we do, any way that we're able to enhance their military is something that like, this is real life for them, and the threats in and around them and their country, the work that we can do to help them is stuff that genuinely helps them defend their own country and defend their way of life. So there's definitely impact there. And I think that a lot of times we don't get to see that impact, and I definitely do here, which is cool. And it's seeing the development is something that's really interesting as a coach and as a mentor myself, watching people develop and watching people take those leadership opportunities and grow from them, take those lessons learned from prior training experiences and be able to apply those things into the next training that they do to be better. Watching that growth, that's something that I find really rewarding. And that's something that, you know, when we're here for a full 6 months, we get to watch so many of those cycles. So we really do get to see that sort of development, and we get to build those meaningful relationships with these young women. So I think that's definitely my favorite. That, and I guess the culture as well. We get to experience the culture in such a meaningful way here because we're so embedded that there's so much about the Jordanian culture that you wouldn't normally get on a conventional deployment. So it's little things. We're just a couple people within this big organization that we're working with day to day. So we're learning how to navigate the JAF, and we're learning how to navigate these little the like intricacies of what that looks like. And it's things that are so different from what we have back home. We attended a brigade change of command parade, or their version of that, this week. And they have their national dish as mansaf. So it's like rice and lamb and this bread, shrak, I think it's called. And so you finish the little ceremony, and then everybody goes and funnels in. And then so you're all standing around these tables, and you like make a little ball of it in your hand, and then you go and pop it in your mouth. And it's it's a very like traditional dish in Jordan. And so anything, any sort of big event, any sort of cause for celebration will always have mansaf. So it's really cool to have those things. And then everybody funnels back, and you have your tea and your coffee and the dessert kanafe. So to have those things, and to be learning Arabic, and to be really engaged in seeing things and understanding their culture from their perspective is something that you don't necessarily see if you're, you know, on one of the American bases somewhere.
Right. Yeah, it does sound definitely more like you're getting a much deeper experience the way that you're experiencing it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting world. We have our language assistants, so it's sort of 1-for-1 almost. When we're for the embeds, so my team of 2 has 2 language assistants, and in a lot of ways they aren't just translating the language for us. In a lot of ways, they're interpreting different nuances of their culture, and they can provide us with a lot of context that we might not see because we just don't understand it. So, you know, there'll be times where we're sitting and everybody's so hospitable that you'll be sitting and having a meeting, and everything's about, you know, you're talking for so long and you're getting to know each other because that's such an important part of like Jordanian life. And then, you know, the LA will kind of nudge you on the shoulder and be like, we need to leave now. It's time that we should go now. So you sort of get up and you're like, oh, thank you for having us. And you kind of move along because nobody's going to ask you to leave.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And so my final question that I ask everyone, what advice would you give to women looking to join the military? And specifically, I guess in your case, looking to join the combat arms?
The biggest thing is if you're thinking about it, just do it. It's not... If it isn't for you, then you're able to get out. But just do it. Get in, try, take the opportunity. It's one of those things you got to work really hard, but keep your head up. The first few years can be challenging, but it does get really rewarding. And I think the biggest thing is that you will find your place. I do believe that there is a place for everyone and most personalities, and you do belong in our organization, and you will find that place that works for you. You know, focusing on being professional and learning as much as you can. It's important, but you know, if you can kind of keep your head up and know that, you know, after you get through that little tough part, once you find that place, it's being part of this team can be such a rewarding life.
For all the people that I've interviewed and I've asked this question, there's sort of like the outliers, but that's the common theme is just do it. Just go for it.
Yeah, I think people work up the idea. You were asking about the combat arms. I think people get really kind of worked up with the idea of how hard it is. Like, don't get me wrong, it's challenging and sometimes it really sucks. But there's a lot of really, really cool things that you can do in the combat arms. There are a lot of really neat experiences, and it's not unattainable. I think people look at it, they look at the infantry, they look at these things, and it isn't for everybody, but it is something that can be for a lot more people than I think they know.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed hearing about what you're doing over there, and it sounds so rewarding, and I'm kind of jealous.
Oh, it's all good. It's definitely a unique opportunity, that's for sure.
My final guest is Captain Jane Jaklič. Jane joined the Canadian Armed Forces as an engineer officer in March 2019 after completing her physics degree. She was posted to 1 Combat Engineer Regiment in June 2021, where she served as a troop commander and operations officer in 11 Field Squadron. She deployed on Op Lentus that same year to help fight forest fires in British Columbia. In November 2022, Jane deployed to Jordan as the Female Engagement Team Mobile Training Team lead. Since arriving in theater, Captain Jaklič and Sergeant Fandrey have worked closely with the Female Engagement Team on a daily basis by building relationships with all of its members and participating in their training events. Their goal with the Female Engagement Team is to build their capacity through training, advising, and mentoring in pursuit of achieving gender integration in the Jordanian Armed Forces. So, Jane, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Mississauga, Ontario, and I lived there pretty much my whole life.
Okay, and did you have any military members in your family?
Not in the CAF. My grandfather did mandatory service in the Yugoslav People's Army for 18 months, but other than that, there's nobody else.
So what sort of activities were you into when you were growing up?
Nothing in particular. I think I started getting into more like sports when I was in high school. I really liked martial arts growing up, so I did Muay Thai in high school, and then I did Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in university. And I also really loved doing basketball and dance, so kind of a mix of different things.
Oh yeah, a nice wide variety. Where did you go to university?
University of Guelph.
Okay, and what led you on the path to joining the CAF?
Whoa, well, it was definitely a long road to get in. I was in university at the time, in my second year, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. I was already in school, obviously, so deciding to go to RMC, for example, that just wasn't in the cards. But I got this idea of really wanting to challenge myself physically and mentally, and I thought, what better way to do that than to be a soldier? But as for being an officer, I became interested in this by listening to a podcast on military leadership called the Jocko podcast, which a lot of people know about at this point. So I became really inspired by Jocko's experiences as a task unit commander in the SEAL teams. As well, he does book summary and analysis on this podcast, most of which talk about military leadership. And I also read his book called Extreme Ownership. And after that, I decided I could become a military leader instead of being an NCM.
How did you choose the specific trade that you wanted to do?
So initially, I wanted to be an infantry officer. I read the memoir of Canada's first infantry officer, Sandra Perron, and I realized that, I may face similar challenges as she did throughout her career. I mean, she did her training in the 90s, so that was obviously a very different time than from when I got in. And while her stories didn't completely deter me, it did make me reconsider my choice of trade. I was in school for physics at the time, and I discovered that I was eligible for applying to be an engineer officer because of my physics degree. So I learned that engineers are in the combat arms and that infantry is their secondary duty. So I was sold on this because it meant that I would get to do a variety of things outside of infantry. Also, my mother thought that engineering was a smarter trade to choose because over time I was still hell-bent on choosing the hardest trade. And she said, engineers sound smart. You should go with the smart people. So I'm really glad I listened to my mom on that one. It's not that infantry officers aren't intelligent. It's just that engineering has that added layer of complexity and critical thinking.
I guess it must feel good to use your degree in some way.
Yeah, I mean, even the engineer, like the people who studied engineering in school, they don't really use their degree when they become engineer officers. But I think the ability to solve problems and do that critical thinking that you gain from physics or engineering or maths, that helps you like during your trades training, at least.
Did you ever consider Navy or Air Force, or were you determined to join the Army?
For a time, I was considering being a pilot, mostly because the recruiters were like, hey, do you like video games? And I said, oh, yes, I definitely like video games. I've been playing them my whole life. They go, great, you can be a pilot. You're the perfect size. You are the right age. You can do it. And I was like, oh, okay, that sounds like a cool idea. And I don't know, I was very impatient because at that point, I was almost finished with my degree. And I understood that to be a pilot, you have to go through the aircrew medical and you have to do the aircrew selection test, which I was going to have to wait like a whole another year for upon graduation. I was just like, I'm so impatient. I just want to get in. And I feel like I will always regret not joining the Army and putting myself through that experience.
Awesome. Yeah, I do know a couple of pilots and, even the application process. But after that, it does take quite a while to go through all of the training pipeline that they have.
Exactly. I mean, my training in Gagetown took 2 years, and even that felt extremely long. So I can't imagine doing the 4 or 5 years that it takes to be a pilot.
So you mentioned reading Jocko's book and sort of listening to his podcast. Do you find that any of that helped you or gave you a little edge when you were going through your training?
I feel like it really helped me because it gave me a good mindset going into it. One of the things that he's really big on is taking ownership in any situation that you're in. Hence the title of his book, Extreme Ownership. It's pretty plain and simple. It's very much that, like, you make a decision, and whether it's the right decision or the wrong decision, you own that decision, and you really mean that you do. You take it to heart. And same goes for anything that you do in your career, really, or in life, I guess. But specifically, throughout the training process, I always had that in the back of my mind. I really took it to heart, and I think it helped me in certain circumstances where, like, I was the one in charge and something went sideways, and I would acknowledge, hey, I made a mistake. This is what I'm going to do to correct it.
Mm-hmm. And I think that, in terms of junior members as well. I feel like they would respect a leader so much more when they take ownership rather than sort of try to make excuses for a mistake that they may have made.
Absolutely.
You're fairly new in the CAF, right? What year did you join?
I joined in 2019. So yeah, I'm still pretty green.
And so what were the biggest challenges for you going through your training to become an engineering officer?
There were many. I mean, right from the get-go, when I went to basic, I wasn't getting along with my fire team partner, and that made it really difficult for me to stay confident, especially because in basic for officers, the BMOQ, they really push the leadership on you from day one, and they make you accountable for everything that you do, and they kind of hold you to a high standard, because they say you're the future leaders of the CAF. You need to be at the top of your game all the time. So this negative relationship I had with my fire team partner was just really wearing on me, and made me doubt myself. But I mean, basic isn't long, and I got through it. Really, the challenge was Gagetown. There was a handful of us on my course, my basic course, that were going to Gagetown. It was like 8 of us. And, you know, we were like infantry, armored. I was the only engineer. And we all knew the challenges that we were going to face, but it certainly became a reality when we actually started doing those courses. So, you know, we go on BMOCA, or what was previously known as CAP, and that was much more challenging than basic, just physically and mentally. A lot of people will say, you know, oh, CAP is easy, like it's nothing compared to your trades course, but I found it rather difficult. We were doing that course in the fall, so the weather was not on our side, because like late fall in Gagetown is that's a challenge in and of itself, just being in the field, in that environment. But yeah, I would say Gagetown was a challenge because COVID hit when I was in Gagetown, so I finished BMACA, and then COVID happened, so we were all sent home for a few months, and then I came back in the summer of 2020, and I started my engineer officer course, BEOC 1.1, so it's basic engineer officer course. And that course was a mix of challenge and fun. Like, we were learning the basics of the engineer trade, like for the combat engineers. That course is the equivalent of the sergeant's course, so you kind of get a fire hose of all the basics, like with using power tools and demolitions, building bridges, using assault boats. And it's a challenging course, but it was fun. And then the last course was the BEOC 1.2. In that course, we do our infantry phase. We had a very challenging infantry exercise. Again, that was the fall in Gagetown. So just a difficult environment to train in. We were doing like 10 hasty attacks a day. It was insane. I think that was physically the hardest field ex I've ever done. And it made me really glad I did not choose infantry. So we did that, and then we did the estimate. So the engineers are the only ones, the only officers in the combat arms that do the Kingston estimate. So we did that for months, and it was very, very intense and long. I don't know if you're familiar with the estimate. It's what they do on ATOC.
Okay, yeah, no, I'm not familiar with it. Do you want to just give a little explanation of what that is?
The estimate is a really long analysis that you do in order to plan a mission, and it makes you make every single consideration you could possibly make so that you can develop your plan, develop your courses of action, your COAs, and produce a set of orders. The test for the estimate is 8 hours long. That's definitely one of the hardest tests I've ever done, and it's very lengthy because you make all these considerations and you're doing like an analysis of a map, and you're like planning out your avenues of approach. For engineers, like if it's an engineer task, you would plan out like what kind of obstacles you're going to lay out, and you have to do all the calculations involved in that. It's a lot of planning, but I do think it's useful because, you know, they always say, oh, you're probably not going to do an estimate like down the road in your career willingly because it's such a long process. At least not at my level, but it does train you to make those considerations in your head, and I think it really helps you to plan something out in a shortened period of time, if that makes sense.
Definitely. And so obviously the combat arms are sort of known for being rather physical. Did you do a specific training program to prepare for these courses?
So before I joined the military, I was just doing general fitness. So I would go for runs, I would do weightlifting, strength training. And then when I got to Gagetown, I was doing a lot of group PT because I was at between courses, I was at the engineer school in the, what is the equivalent of a PAT platoon. We just did like combat fitness, not ruck runs, but like shuffling with a small pack on. We would do like ammo can PT, bridge PT. So you're like doing lifts with bridge panels, which you do need to do if you're in engineering because we build bridges. So yeah, I did like a lot of just random fitness like that. And then again, for personal PT, when I would do PT on my own time, just tried to do strength training, especially for my upper body, because when you're wearing your kit in the field and you have to run around in it, or you have to run around with like a rucksack on, you need your upper body to be strong and stable, especially your core and your back.
And so this deployment that you're on right now, where are you located?
We are in Jordan. So this is the city of Amman in Jordan.
And what is your role on this deployment?
So for the deployment, I'm in an MTT, so it's a mobile training team. Mine is the Female Engagement Team MTT, and I'm the lead. I have my 2IC, Sergeant Fandrey, and the two of us, we work with the Female Engagement Team Platoon in the Jordanian Armed Forces. It's essentially a group of women that specialize in doing various tasks like handling refugees, conducting security checkpoints, humanitarian aid in times of crisis, but they are by default an infantry platoon. So they're a very unique entity within the JAF, and we are here to mentor, train, and advise them on how they can essentially be better soldiers. Like they are really amazing soldiers. It's just what we're specifically trying to achieve is gender integration in the Middle East, not just in Jordan.
What do you enjoy the most about doing this type of work?
What I enjoy the most is the wonderful relationships that I've built with these people. They're so unique, and we have so much to learn from them just as they do from us. And it's an honor to get to work with them every single day, to teach them how to do proper PT, for example, especially because we have a bunch of new girls now who 3 months ago have never done PT in their lives. That's very much a culture thing. In Jordan, fitness is not really something that young women do, and it truly is an honor to teach them how to do PT, what they can do with their bodies, explain to them what we do while we do it, when we're like going for a run or when we're having a stretching session. Yeah, so getting to improve them physically, even in terms of turning them into soldiers, it's a wonderful experience. I love it.
Awesome. Yes, I did speak with your 2IC as well. So, and I told her, I was like, oh, I do feel a bit jealous because I would love to go there and do a deployment like that. It just sounds really amazing.
Yeah, it really is. I feel so lucky.
Have you done any of the domestic deployments in Canada as an engineer officer?
I have, yes. So I got posted to 1 CER in June of 2021. And a month and a half later, we deployed for the fires in BC. So I was only like a month into my troop command time. I was really fresh. I had a whole new troop, and we were like, my squadron was going to Oliver, BC to fight these forest fires. And I found it a little bit intimidating at first because I was like, oh my goodness, this is a real experience. And my leadership skills will be put to the test. But it actually turned out to be an awesome experience because I got to practice my leadership skills in a non-tactical setting. It was helpful for me, especially because I was never assessed as an engineer troop commander on my course. That exercise was canceled due to COVID. So this was like a happy medium where, yes, I had a real troop, I had real responsibilities, especially due to the somewhat dangerous nature of like working in an environment where there are forest fires. At the same time, though, I didn't have to we weren't being tactical. Like, we were wearing these red coveralls, and it was just like, just hanging out with the troops when there wasn't any work to do.
It sounds really exciting for you that sort of in your fairly short career so far, you've gotten to do some pretty exciting things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so my final question that I always ask all of my guests is, what advice would you give to women looking to join the military, and then in your case, specifically the combat arms?
So I think that we live in a society now that pushes for equality more than ever. I think that particularly because of what I see here in the Middle East as opposed to back in Canada, the way we view gender in Canada is very, we really do see each other as equals with like the same opportunities, the same pay, the same expectations. At least in terms of a career, that's definitely not the case here in Jordan. But I think that in the military, you you need to be able to do what your colleagues do physically and mentally. Nobody's gonna lower the standards for you, and you have to be able to measure up. And that can be really intimidating if you're a minority in whatever group you find yourself in. Like, maybe before you join, you never thought as a woman you would be a minority. You know, like, we're basically half the population. It's strange to find yourself in that in those circumstances. But yeah, whether you're on a course or you're at your unit, you need to remind yourself of how capable you are and all the preparation you've done to get to this point. And that there have been many women who have come before you and have passed the trials of the training system. I think that the training system is actually the hardest to get through, especially because it can be so long. For some people, it lasts several years because they get injured or they fail off of courses, and that can be very discouraging. And I think that goes for whether you're a man or a woman. So I think in those moments, you just need to trust yourself at all times and remember that you have something to bring to the table just as everyone else does.
That's excellent advice. And thank you so much for being here today and sharing your story.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. The biggest way to help support this podcast is to leave a rating and review on your Apple Podcasts and Spotify apps. You can also visit my Instagram page at Shoot Like a Girl Podcast to see photos from the guests, keep up to date with the podcast, and find out about any merchandise releases.